welcome back to Spoony Squared. I'm Becky and I was diagnosed with autism 1 year ago today at the age of 41. And I know I was diagnosed today because it's actually World Autism or Autism Awareness Day today, 2nd of April. So it's very handy that I was diagnosed on that day because I'll always remember my anniversary of diagnosis. So I thought today I would do a video answering your questions about what it was to be diagnosed at the age of 41 and kind of what my life has been like since then. So let's go to the questions. What are the top 3 positive things my autism diagnosis has given me? It's been really profound, and I've got to say, like, overall it's been an incredibly positive experience. So the first thing that it has given me is like such a self-confidence, which might sound really weird to some people, but for the first time in my life I feel like I have a proper understanding of who I am, and it meant that I no longer need to kind of label myself in any particular way. I can just be Becky. So that's definitely number one, and that's led to a million other really good things happening. It led to me deciding to move on from jobs that weren't working for me. It's opened up new jobs for me. Second thing is this right here, connecting to you on Spoony Squared. It's really, after I got my diagnosis, it was something obviously like, and I think many of you will understand this, you sort of struggle before diagnosis and you don't really know what's going on, and you often don't, like, there can be this sense of, oh, perhaps I don't get to be part of this community if I don't have a formal diagnosis yet. And of course, if you don't have a formal diagnosis yet, you very much are part of this community. But I definitely had that feeling. So once I'd got the diagnosis, I felt much more confident talking about my experiences on here. And of course, that's then allowed me to connect with so many of you. And I really appreciate the comments, and I hope that I'm able to provide some kind of positive impact by sharing my story. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that I have been able to help other people. There's been various other people in my life who actually kind of suspected that they are neurodivergent, and through my experience I've been able to kind of be better help to them, because obviously I've got a deeper understanding. So I think that that's the 3 positive things that I've got from my diagnosis. So the next question is, what are the most difficult things with getting an autism diagnosis? I think the first one was, it happened right after I got the diagnosis, and it was that I suddenly realised like all of the stigma of having autism and how I've looked at that, and without realising that I kind of, it can be seen as a negative thing, and of course because there are many challenges. And I think when I first got diagnosed, I found that there were people who, when I first got diagnosed, I struggled to, and it only lasted for about a week, but it was quite a, oh my gosh, who am I then? Like, what, am I someone totally different to who I've thought I've always been? And then of course, like, the flip of that then happened, which was that it was, it actually helped me to realise that I can literally just be myself. Other things that I think have been quite difficult, in engaging with the community, I think I've had to be quite mindful that my experience is not the same as everybody's experience, and I've got to be sensitive to the fact that other people have different experiences. And I think sometimes by sharing my experience, of course, I get some negative comments back as well, and they can be difficult to deal with. And so that's, but those are all things that you can ultimately learn from, and you can use them to be more sensitive to other people as well. And I think probably the other thing being that feeling of regret, I guess, of that there were all these times in my life where I know I was struggling because of this, and it could have been so different, and it could have, like, my life would have been so different if I had known and if I'd have had some awareness. And so that definitely is something, it's almost like this grieving for the life that you could have had, and you've got to be really careful not to spend a lot of time dwelling on that, because it definitely, like, there's a lot of painful times, there's a lot of traumatic times that if I'd have known, I wouldn't have had to go through. So but of course all of those things are also what now connect me to other people in the community, so I think that that's the most difficult things. What are the top resources I'd recommend to other people with autism? I think that a lot of this I did before I got my diagnosis, so there's definitely people I have watched on YouTube. Autism on the Inside, which is Paul. There's some other people as well, and I will link, I'll put those in the show notes. I read various books that have been quite useful, and I think, again, in some ways the books and the resources sort of just help me with understanding the sensitivities that others are going through as well. So I read Ellie Middleton's book. So Ellie Middleton's book is Unmasked, and then I read Women with Autism. I actually did a review of this one when I first read it, so you can find that on my YouTube channel. And I think these were both different. It's so interesting reading. So Ellie's, I read this just earlier this year, so I'd probably already read quite a lot before I read this book, and this was because she talks about ADHD, autism and neurodivergence. There's some really good kind of, I guess, basics in terms of the concepts in here. On the autism side of things, I already knew everything because I'd read it, but it's always good to see things from a different angle. Particularly like some of the things she was talking about in terms of like clarity that she needs at work. But the ADHD piece was something I hadn't read an awful lot about. So that was quite useful, because I think once you're neurodivergent, suddenly everyone expects you to know everything about autism, ADHD, all the other types of neurodivergence, and of course I don't know all of that, and I understand autism better than I understand dyslexia, bipolar, ADHD, so it helped me to learn that. Something with this, it's so interesting that I got diagnosed at 41. Now for some of you, I know that 41 probably seems really, really young, and you're like, you're still partway through your career, you can still make positive changes, it's like much easier to do that now. Talk about grieving my life, like, but I've only got 41 years to grieve, and some people have a lot longer than that. So it's interesting when I read books from people who are younger, and of course they're saying the same thing, like they wish they were younger when they found out. But to me, I guess when somebody's maybe 24 and they get a diagnosis, and this is definitely not throwing any shade at this, but it also, I think, like, oh, I wish I'd have had my diagnosis at 24, like, that's only just getting into my adult life, it would have made things so much easier. So it's interesting to look at it from that way, because, yeah, when somebody's that much younger, it's quite a different experience than when you get diagnosed at 41. Getting a private diagnosis can be expensive, and I paid £600, and for many of you that will seem really, really cheap compared to most things that are out there, and I was really lucky to be able to get that through psychiatry, and so there's definitely steps to take before getting that diagnosis. Now, unfortunately, I mean, when I got referred, I guess I got referred, so I initially went through the NHS process, and I've talked about this on other videos, and it was going to be 3 years before I got seen. I've now got other friends who've like literally just been to the doctors, and they're getting told that people who were referred in 2018 are getting seen. Like 2018, that's 6 years ago. So I'd love to say, like, before you think about going and getting a private diagnosis, just go to the NHS, like, who knows. I have heard that because you can, with the NHS now, you have the option to choose. So you have the option to choose where you get referred to, and I've heard that there's new clinics coming on board which you can get referred to. And of course, I'm talking about the NHS, I'm talking about the UK. So I would say, like, one thing to do before paying lots of money is to look at other options that you might have. Unfortunately, I think those options are probably quite limited. So then what you need to look at is, what are your objectives for getting the diagnosis? I think that for me, I kind of needed that validation, but I haven't had any treatment since diagnosis. Not specifically for this. In fact, I don't think I've had any treatment for anything. But for me, the awareness has been enough to then kind of really self-regulate, and I can understand myself a lot better. So if what you're looking for is kind of immediate lots of treatment or other things, then be very aware that, like, the diagnosis is just going to be the start of that. Now, if you get the diagnosis, you can potentially then go through other routes in the NHS to get some of that treatment. And so for many of you, is, I think, really looking at what objectives you have for getting that diagnosis, and whether or not this is something that you need to prioritize. You can, of course, go about kind of getting other help whilst you're waiting for the diagnosis. So you might find that instead of going for a private diagnosis, you might be suffering lots of anxiety. So it could be that you get some support for anxiety. There's certain things that the NHS can do quickly and easily, or relatively quickly and easily, once you get a GP appointment. So things like prescribing anti-anxiety medication or antidepressants. Medication's the easiest stuff. They just pop you a pill, but it's obviously not necessarily right for everybody, and it's not the most effective. So I think, yeah, just getting really clear about what it is, what you need, and ask yourself whether you do need that validation. And of course, you might need that for practical reasons, you might need that for work, for study, and that's a validation of getting the diagnosis. Or ask yourself whether you actually can start to trust your own view in terms of, like, a self-diagnosis, and whether that serves you enough. And I kind of wish that I could have, like, self-diagnosed and been comfortable with that. I still now don't really think I could have been, and you know, and that's things like talking about it. You know, so sometimes I do talks, and go out and do kind of speaking engagements, that kind of thing, and I don't feel like I can do those kind of things without having the formal diagnosis, which, you know, when it takes so long and it's so inaccessible to so many people, is a shame. If autism was an animal, what would it be? Probably be Angus. I love how earnest I was in terms of answering that question. What do you expect? Yeah, I think cats are quite autistic, because I feel like I resonate with cats. Dogs are more ADHD, right? Cats like things their own way. They like being solitary, well, even though they live in packs. I don't know, whatever. But Angus is just like me, and he's a cat.